Peace be up on you. My name's Johanse Trillion, and this is, as far as I can tell, episode 17. And we're just gonna call this Joseph, Mary, and a baby. Yes, here we are. Like Joseph, Mary, and a baby. This is gonna be coming from paper 122, Birth and Infancy of Jesus. Now, the last episode, setting the stage, I talked about the region and the times that Michael came to this planet in Palestine. It was pretty much the Roman Empire was emerging. Greek culture and language was kind of mixed up with it, and Judaism was sprinkled all throughout the empire. And Jews had this supreme focus really on Jerusalem being their holy city, and they're awaiting a Messiah. And their Messiah is more nationalistic in a sense. But this is what they're waiting on. And those were the times he was born into. So that was the last episode. But this is just what it says it is. Birth and infancy of Jesus. It's the real deal. The raw, uncut begins now. It will hardly be possible fully to explain the many reasons which led to the selection of Palestine as the land for Michael's bestowal, and especially as to just why the family of Joseph and Mary should have been chosen as the immediate setting for the appearance of this Son of God on Urantia. Just a brief note, this whole narrative that we're about to get into was put together by a midway creature. And this is the midway creature that was at one time assigned to Andrew. And Andrew was the chief apostle, so to say. He was like the manager of the clique, as we'll see. But anyway, he's the one, along with other midwayers, other celestial beings, who put this narrative together. So they got a spiritual eye view. After a study of the special report on the status of segregated worlds prepared by the Melchizedeks in council with Gabriel, Michael finally chose Urantia as the planet whereon to enact his final bestowal. Real quick, they just saying that some Melchizedeks, along with Gabriel, selected, Michael finally chose Urantia out of a few different isolated planets. Isolated meaning like cut off and quarantined like we are from the Lucifer rebellion. We aren't the only planet that has been quarantined and segregated, so to say, from the Lucifer rebellion. So out of a few different planets that were who seceded, so to say, he chose this one. Subsequent to this decision, Gabriel made a personal visit to Urantia, and as a result of his study of human groups and his survey of the spiritual, intellectual, racial, and geographic features of the world and its peoples, he decided that the Hebrews possessed those relative advantages which warranted their selection as the bestowal race. Upon Michael's approval of this decision, Gabriel appointed and dispatched to Urantia the family commission of 12, selected from among the higher orders of universe personalities, which was entrusted with the task of making an investigation of Jewish family life. Gabriel appointed a commission of 12 celestial beings to go down there and study these people that Michael's finna be born into. Now, and real quick, the Jewish people are a thing, a reality, the Hebrews, because of Melchizedek, who came 2,000 years prior, or about 1,900 years prior to the arrival of Christ. And that was his mission, mainly to put together a people for Michael to eventually be born into. And he did that by selecting Abraham and told him, like, you're responsible for getting this people together. That's what the whole covenant was about. When the commission ended its labors, Gabriel was present on Urantia and received the report nominating 3 prospective unions as being, in the opinion of the commission, equally favorable as bestowal families for Michael's projected incarnation. So the commission came back and was like, man, these 3 couples, they'll make a good home for Michael. From the 3 couples nominated, Gabriel made the personal choice of Joseph and Mary, subsequently making his personal appearance to Mary, at which time he imparted to her the glad tidings that she had been selected to become the earth mother of the bestowal child. Those were just the opening paragraphs of paper 122, Birth and Infancy of Jesus. I know a lot of this material has been pretty dense. The Urantia papers are very dense, and it takes focus in this world of ADD. Like, it's hard to process and decipher some of it because it's blinding light at times, and they're trying to relay so much. Here nor there, this part of the book, the life and teachings of Jesus, the 4th part, is easy reading. It flows like a narrative, so you can read along. That's what I'm saying all that for. And read at your own leisure. Like, this is something everybody should read on their own. If you're a truth seeker, if you really want to know what's going on in the world and what you belong to and what is life about, if that interests you, this is a must read. Joseph and Mary. This is part 1. Joseph and Mary. Joseph, the human father of Jesus. Joshua ben Joseph. They say, I know, man. I know some. I'm not finna get too sidetracked anymore, but I know how some of y'all live, man. Nah, man, it ain't no Jesus, because the Jews didn't even have a J. The Hebrew language don't even have a J, so it wasn't no Jesus. They made that up. That's how I done heard you. So just understand that this was translated in English. These papers materialized in the English language. There are subsequent translations, but they're speaking English. And we say Joseph in English. I don't know any other language, unfortunately. I speak English myself. So all that to say, we say Joseph. Joseph, the human father of Jesus, Joshua ben Joseph, was a Hebrew of the Hebrews, albeit he carried many non-Jewish racial strains which had been added to his ancestral tree from time to time by the female lines of his progenitors. The ancestry of the father of Jesus went back to the days of Abraham, and through this venerable patriarch to the earlier lines of inheritance, leading to the Sumerians and Nodites, and through the southern tribes of the ancient blue man to Andon and Phanta. Andon and Phanta were the original man and woman. But that's a whole nother story for another time. David and Solomon were not in the direct line of Joseph's ancestry. Neither did Joseph's lineage go directly back to Adam. Joseph's immediate ancestors were mechanics, builders, carpenters, masons, and smiths. Joseph himself was a carpenter and later a contractor. His family belonged to a long and illustrious line of the nobility of the common people, accentuated ever and anon by the appearance of unusual individuals who had distinguished themselves in connection with the evolution of religion on Urantia. In short, Joseph came from real good, solid stock. Mary, the earth mother of Jesus, was the descendant of a long line of unique ancestors embracing many of the most remarkable women in the racial history of Urantia. Although Mary was an average woman of her day and generation, possessing a fairly normal temperament, she reckoned among her ancestors such well-known women as Anan, Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba, Anzi, Chloe, Eve, Enta, and Rada. No Jewish women of that day had a more illustrious lineage of common progenitors or one extending back to more auspicious beginnings. Mary's ancestry, like Joseph's, was characterized by the predominance of strong but average individuals, relieved now and then by numerous outstanding personalities in the march of civilization and the progressive evolution of religion. Racially considered, it is hardly proper to regard Mary as a Jewess. In culture and belief, she was a Jew, but in hereditary endowment, she was more a composite of Syrian, Hittite, Phoenician, Greek, and Egyptian stocks, her racial inheritance being more general than that of Joseph. Of all couples living in Palestine at about the time of Michael's projected bestowal, Joseph and Mary possessed the most ideal combination of widespread racial connections and superior average of personality endowments. It was the plan of Michael to appear on earth as an average man, that the common people might understand him and receive him. Wherefore Gabriel selected just such persons as Joseph and Mary to become the bestower parents. So yeah, these were like salt of the earth people, Joseph and Mary. You know, they really just came from good stock, but average people. This wasn't nobility. They weren't kings and queens or nothing. 2, Gabriel appears to Elizabeth. Jesus' life work on Urantia was really begun by John the Baptist. Zacharias, John's father, belonged to the Jewish priesthood, while his mother, Elizabeth, was a member of the more prosperous branch of the same large family group to which Mary, the mother of Jesus, also belonged. Zacharias and Elizabeth, though they had been married many years, were childless. Check this out. It was late in the month of June, 8 BC, about 3 months after the marriage of Joseph and Mary, that Gabriel appeared to Elizabeth at a nude tide one day, just as he later made his presence known to Mary. Said Gabriel, "While your husband Zacharias stands before the altar in Jerusalem, and while the assembled people pray for the coming of a deliverer, I, Gabriel, have come to announce that you will shortly bear a son who shall be the forerunner of this divine teacher, and you shall call your son John. He will grow up dedicated to the Lord your God, and when he has come to full years, he will gladden your heart because he will turn many souls to God. And he will also proclaim the coming of the soul healer of your people and the spirit liberator of all mankind. Your kinswoman Mary shall be the mother of this child of promise, and I will also appear to her." The vision greatly frightened Elizabeth. After Gabriel's departure, she turned this experience over in her mind, long pondering the sayings of the majestic visitor, but did not speak of the revelation to anyone save her husband until her subsequent visit with Mary in early February of the following year. For 5 months, however, Elizabeth withheld her secret For 5 months, however, Elizabeth withheld her secret even from her husband. Upon her disclosure of the story of Gabriel's visit, Zacharias was very skeptical and for weeks doubted the entire experience, only consenting half-heartedly to believe in Gabriel's visit to his wife when he could no longer question that she was expecting with child. So, yeah, this is pretty, that's a, hey man, any man, if you find, my old lady was like a spirit visited me and they said we finna have a child. I don't know how I would take it. Zacharias was very much perplexed regarding the prospective motherhood of Elizabeth, but he did not doubt the integrity of his wife, notwithstanding his own advanced age. It was not until about 6 weeks before John's birth that Zacharias, as the result of an impressive dream, became fully convinced that Elizabeth was to become the mother of a son of destiny, one who was to prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah. So it took a dream for Zacharias to really realize, oh, this is real. Gabriel appeared to Mary about the middle of November 8 BC while she was at work in her Nazareth home. Later on, after Mary knew without doubt that she was to become a mother, she persuaded Joseph to let her journey to the city of Judah. Basically, they just talk about, because they're going to go into detail with Gabriel's announcement to Mary. They're talking about how Mary met up with Elizabeth to go over things. They were cousins. They were distant cousins. And so he appeared to both of them. Let me skip down. John was born in the city of Judah, March 25th, 7 BC. Zacharias and Elizabeth rejoiced greatly in the realization that a son had come to them as Gabriel had promised. From his earliest infancy, John was judiciously impressed by his parents with the idea that he was to grow up to become a spiritual leader and religious teacher, and the soil of John's heart was ever responsive to the sowing of such suggestive seeds. Even as a child, he was found frequently at the temple during the seasons of his father's service, and he was tremendously impressed with the significance of all that he saw. Part 3. Gabriel's announcement to Mary. One evening, about sundown, before Joseph had returned home, Gabriel appeared to Mary by the side of a low stone table, and after she had recovered her composure, said, I come at the bidding of one who is my master, and whom you shall love and nurture. To you, Mary, I bring glad tidings when I announce that the conception within you is ordained by heaven, and that in due time you will become the mother of a son. You shall call him Joshua, and he shall inaugurate the kingdom of heaven on earth and among men. Speak not of this matter save of Joseph and to Elizabeth, your kinswoman, to whom I have also appeared, who shall presently also bear a son, whose name shall be John, and who will prepare the way for the message of deliverance, which your son shall proclaim to men with great power and deep conviction. And doubt not my word, Mary, for this home has been chosen as the mortal habitat for the child of destiny. My benediction rest upon you. The power of the Most Highs will strengthen you, and the Lord of all the earth shall overshadow you. Mary pondered this visitation secretly in her heart for many weeks, until of a certainty she knew she was with child, before she dared to disclose these unusual events to her husband. When Joseph heard all about this, although he had great confidence in Mary, he was much troubled and could not sleep for many nights. At first, Joseph had doubts about the Gabriel visitation. Then, when he became well nigh persuaded that Mary had really heard the voice and beheld the form of the divine messenger, he was torn in mind as he pondered how such things could be. How could the offspring of human beings be a child of divine destiny. Never could Joseph reconcile these conflicting ideas until, after several weeks of thought, both he and Mary reached the conclusion that they had been chosen to become the parents of the Messiah, though it had hardly been the Jewish concept that the expected deliverer was to be of divine nature. Upon arriving at this momentous conclusion, Mary hastened to depart for a visit with Elizabeth. So, Joseph, he knew Mary, and she was pretty of a sound mind, and he just can't, nah, man, what? So she went to visit Elizabeth. Upon her return, Mary went to visit her parents. I guess you say Joachim and Hannah. Her two brothers and two sisters, as well as her parents, were always very skeptical about the divine mission of Jesus, though, of course, at this time they knew nothing of the Gabriel visitation. So they're just talking about his whole life, like they didn't really, it's like Jesus, whatever, his own family. And that's how it be, y'all know. But Mary did confide to her sister Salome that she thought her son was destined to become a great teacher. Now, she couldn't tell nobody about the visit of Gabriel, only Joseph. Gabriel's announcement to Mary, I feel like I gotta preface this. Let's get this over with. This is once and for all. Gabriel's announcement to Mary was made the day following the conception of Jesus and was the only event of supernatural occurrence connected with her entire experience of carrying and bearing the child of promise. The only thing supernatural about the birth of Jesus was Gabriel coming down here and telling her beforehand. What they just said, Gabriel's announcement to Mary was made the day following the conception of Jesus. They were earthly parents and they had sex, and that conception is what they chose to bless. It wasn't no virgin thing. It wasn't no God impregnating. No, these were mortal beings whose conception was actually blessed and was to be Jesus. He was going to be, and it's inexplicable. It's always going to be that way. Like we'll never just know, man, how they do that. I mean, damn, why would you know? You know what I'm saying? Like we're talking about an infinite being. We can't understand the ways, but nevertheless, let's kill that she was a virgin myth. That wasn't that. 4. Joseph's dream. Joseph did not become reconciled to the idea that Mary was to become the mother of an extraordinary child until after he had experienced a very impressive dream. Hey man, these dreams, it took a dream for Zacharias to realize it, and it took a dream for Joseph to realize that. And you know, sometimes when you pray and meditate, things can happen that way. You can get some answers in a dream. In this dream, a brilliant celestial messenger appeared to him and among other things said, Joseph, I appear by command of him who now reigns on high, and I am directed to instruct you concerning the son whom Mary shall bear, and who shall become a great light in the world. In him will be life, and his life shall be the light of mankind. He shall first come to his own people, but they will hardly receive him. But to as many as shall receive him, to them will he reveal that they are the children of God. After this experience, Joseph never again wholly doubted Mary's story of Gabriel's visit and of the promise that the unborn child was to become a divine messenger to the world. In all these visitations, nothing was said about the house of David. Nothing was even intimated about Jesus' becoming a deliverer of the Jews. Intimated about Jesus' becoming a deliverer of the Jews. Not even that he was to be the long expected Messiah. So what they're saying is, throughout none of this, Gabriel didn't tell Zacharias he's just going to be for the Jewish people. He didn't tell Joseph that. I mean, they didn't tell Mary nothing like that. And none of this was said in either Zacharias' or Joseph's dream, nor was Elizabeth told anything about, a Jewish Messiah. They just want to get this clear, like this is for the world and all people, not just y'all. In all these visitations, nothing was said about the house of David. Nothing was ever intimated about Jesus becoming a deliverer of the Jews, not even that he was to be the long-expected Messiah. Jesus was not such a Messiah as the Jews had anticipated, but he was the world's deliverer. His mission was to all races and peoples, not to any one group. Joseph was not of the line of King David. Mary had more of the Davidic ancestry than Joseph. True, Joseph did go to the city of David, Bethlehem, to be registered for the Roman census, but that was because 6 generations previously, Joseph's paternal ancestor of that generation, being an orphan, was adopted by one Zadok, who was a direct descendant of David. Hence was Joseph also accounted as of the house of David. So evidently among the Jews, that was a big thing to be in line. This is what the Messiah that they were expecting really had to be from this line of David. And they're really saying like Joseph wasn't even really a part of that. Most of the so-called messianic prophecies of the Old Testament were made to apply to Jesus long after his life had been lived on earth. I'm gonna skip down a little bit because they just expound on that idea and how the reality doesn't necessarily line up with what a lot of Old Testament prophecies try to make Jesus like he had to come this particular way. They just expound on it. Part 5, Jesus's earth parents. Joseph was a mild-mannered man, extremely conscientious, and in every way faithful to the religious conventions and practices of his people. He taught little, but thought much. The sorry plight of the Jewish people caused Joseph much sadness. I feel him. Although, my people. But here nor there. As a youth among his 8 brothers and sisters, he had been more cheerful, but in the earlier years of married life, during Jesus' childhood, he was subject to periods of mild spiritual discouragement. These temperamental manifestations were greatly improved just before his untimely death, and after the economic condition of his family had been enhanced by his advancement from the rank of carpenter to the role of a prosperous contractor. Mary's temperament was quite opposite to that of her husband. She was usually cheerful, was very rarely downcast, and possessed an ever-sunny disposition. Mary indulged in free and frequent expression of her emotional feelings and was never observed to be sorrowful until after the sudden death of Joseph. Don't worry, we're going to get into that. It's some years later, but yeah, that's what happened. And she had hardly recovered from this shock when she had thrust upon her the anxieties and questionings aroused by the extraordinary career of her eldest son, which was so rapidly unfolding before her astonished gaze. But throughout all this unusual experience, Mary was composed, courageous, and fairly wise in her relationship with her strange and little understood firstborn son and his surviving brothers and sisters. Jesus derived much of his unusual gentleness and marvelous sympathetic understanding of human nature from his father. He inherited his gift as a great teacher and his tremendous capacity for righteous indignation from his mother. In emotional reactions to his adult life environment, Jesus was at one time like his father, meditative and worshipful, sometimes characterized by apparent sadness. But more often than more often he drove forward in the manner of his mother's optimistic and determined disposition. All in all, Mary's temperament tended to dominate the career of the divine son as he grew up and swung into the momentous strides of his adult life. In some particulars, Jesus was a blending of his parents' traits. In other respects, he exhibited the traits of one in contrast with the other. From Joseph, Jesus secured his strict training in the usages of the Jewish ceremonials and his unusual acquaintance with the Hebrew scriptures. From Mary, he derived a broader viewpoint of religious life and a more liberal concept of personal spiritual freedom. The families of both Joseph and Mary were well educated for their time. Joseph and Mary were educated far above the average for their day and station in life. He was a thinker. She was a planner, expert in adaptation and practical in immediate execution. Joseph was a black-eyed brunette, Mary a brown-eyed, well-nigh blonde type. Had Joseph lived, he undoubtedly would have become a firm believer in the divine mission of his eldest son. Mary alternated between believing and doubting, being greatly influenced by the position taken by her other children and by her friends and relatives. Ain't that something? But always was she steadied in her final attitude by the memory of Gabriel's appearance to her immediately after the child was conceived. So yes, even Mary at times didn't believe in what Jesus was doing. Mary was an expert weaver and more than averagely skilled in most of the household arts of that day. She was a good housekeeper and a superior homemaker. Both Joseph and Mary were good teachers, and they saw to it that their children were well versed in the learning of that day. So this is how they met. They finna go into it. When Joseph was a young man, he was employed by Mary's father in the work of building an addition to his house. And it was when Mary brought Joseph a cup of water during a noontime meal that the courtship of the pair who were destined to become the parents of Jesus really began. Joseph and Mary were married in accordance with Jewish custom at Mary's home in the environs of Nazareth when Joseph was 21 years old. This marriage concluded a normal courtship of almost 2 years' duration. Shortly thereafter, they moved into their new home in Nazareth, which had been built by Joseph with the assistance of 2 of his brothers. The house was located near the foot of the nearby elevated land which so charmingly overlooked the surrounding countryside. In this home, especially prepared, these young and expectant parents had thought to welcome the child of promise, little realizing that this momentous event of a universe was to transpire while they would be absent from home in Bethlehem of Judea. So what they just said was they had this house prepared expecting to bring forth this child in Nazareth, but little did they know while the whole universe is watching that it was going to take place in Bethlehem. The larger part of Joseph's family became believers in the teachings of Jesus, but very few of Mary's people ever believed in him until after he departed from this world. Joseph leaned more toward the spiritual concept of the expected Messiah, but Mary and her family, especially her father, held to the idea of the Messiah as a temporal deliverer and political ruler. Temporal, meaning temporary, and political ruler. You got to understand, like, they were expecting somebody to bring them into national glory. And that's about it. They weren't, as the Jewish people, the Hebrews, expecting this Messiah. Most of them were expecting a national deliverer. This was like political, and this is what they wanted at the time. Because again, they were under the Roman yoke. So, and I just got to make that point clear because this is a major point of contention throughout Jesus' entire life. 6, the home at Nazareth. This is part 6. The home of Jesus was not far from the high hill in the northerly part of Nazareth, some distance from the village spring, which was in the eastern section of the town. Jesus' family dwelt in the outskirts of the city, and this made it all the easier for him subsequently to enjoy frequent strolls in the country and to make trips up to the top of his nearby highland. They just go a little bit further in detail, but as you can see, it was in Nazareth. The home of Joseph and Mary was a one-room stone structure with a flat roof and an adjoining building for housing the animals. The furniture consisted of a low stone table, earthenware, and stone dishes and pots, a loom, a lampstand, several small, I'm tripping off the detail, and it get greater. A loom, a lampstand, several small stools, and mats for sleeping on the stone floor. In the backyard near the animal annex was the shelter which covered the oven and the mill for grinding grain. It required 2 persons to operate this type of mill, one to grind and another one to feed the grain. As a small boy, Jesus often fed grain to this mill while his mother turned the grinder. In later years, as the family grew in size, they would all squat about the enlarged stone table to enjoy their meals, helping themselves from a common dish of pot or food. After the birth of Martha, Joseph built, in addition to this house, a large room which was used as a carpenter's shop during the day and as a sleeping room at night. Part 7. The trip to Bethlehem. In the month of March 8 BC, the month Joseph and Mary were married, Caesar Augustus decreed that all inhabitants of the Roman Empire should be numbered, that a census should be made, which could be used for effecting better taxation. The Jews had always been greatly prejudiced against any attempt to, quote unquote, number the people. And this in connection with the serious domestic difficulties of Harad, king of Judea. That was the land, pretty much the country was known as Judea, that Nazareth was in at the time, which is we call Palestine now. And this in connection, or Israel, and this in connection with the serious domestic difficulties of Harad, king of Judea, had conspired to cause the postponement of the taking of this census in the Jewish kingdom for 1 year. It was not necessary that Mary should go to Bethlehem for enrollment. Joseph was authorized to register for his family, but Mary, being an adventurous and aggressive person, insisted on accompanying him. She feared being left alone lest the child be born while Joseph was away. And again, Bethlehem being not far from the city of Judah, Mary foresaw a possible pleasurable visit with her kinswoman, Elizabeth. Joseph virtually forbade Mary to accompany him, but it was of no avail. When the food was packed for the trip of 3 or 4 days, she prepared double rations and made ready for the journey. But before they actually set forth, Joseph was reconciled to Mary's going along and they cheerfully departed from Nazareth at the break of day. Joseph and Mary were poor, and since they only had one beast of burden, Mary, being large with child, rode on the animal with the provisions while Joseph walked, leading the beast. The building and furnishing of a home had been a great drain on Joseph, since he had also to contribute to the support of his parents, as his father had been recently disabled. And so this Jewish couple went forth from their humble home early on the morning of August 18th, 7 BC, on their journey to Bethlehem. Their first day of travel carried them around the foothills of Mount Gilboa, where they camped for the night by the River Jordan and engaged in many speculations as to what sort of a son would be born to them. Now, Mary is like, it's any day now, so they just sitting around talking. Joseph, they're just talking about, speculating what sort of son was going to be born to them. Joseph adhering to the concept of a spiritual teacher, and Mary holding to the idea of a Jewish Messiah, a deliverer of the Hebrew nation. Bright and early the morning of August 19th, Joseph and Mary were again on their way. They partook of their noontide meal at the foot of Mount Saratoga, overlooking the Jordan Valley, and journeyed on, making Jericho for the night. Following the evening meal and after much discussion concerning the oppressiveness of Roman rule, Harad, the census enrollment, and the comparative influence of Jerusalem and Alexandria as centers of Jewish learning and culture, the Nazareth travelers retired for the night's rest. So they were just, again, talking, chilling, pondering things. Early in the morning of August 20th, they resumed their journey, reaching Jerusalem before noon, visiting the temple and going on to their destination, arriving at Bethlehem in mid-afternoon. The inn was overcrowded, and Joseph accordingly sought lodgings with distant relatives, but every room in Bethlehem was filled to overflowing. On returning to the courtyard of the inn, he was informed that the caravan stables, hewn out of the side of the rock and situated just below the inn, had been cleared of animals and cleaned up for the reception of lodgers. Leaving the donkey in the courtyard, Joseph shouldered their bags of clothing and provisions, and with Mary descended the stone steps to their lodgings below. They found themselves located in what had been a grain storage room to the front of the stalls and mangers. Tent curtains had been hung, and they counted themselves fortunate to have such comfortable quarters. Joseph had thought to go out at once and enroll, but Mary was weary. She was considerably distressed and besought him to remain by her side, which he did. Part 8. The birth of Jesus. All that night Mary was restless, so that neither of them slept much. By the break of day, the pangs of childbirth were well in evidence, and at noon, August 21st, 7 BC, with the help and kind ministrations of women fellow travelers, Mary was delivered of a male child. Jesus of Nazareth was born into the world, was wrapped in the clothes which Mary had brought along for such possible contingency, and laid in a nearby manger. In just the same manner as all babies before that day and since have come into the world, the promised child was born. And on the 8th day, according to the Jewish practice, he was circumcised and formally named Joshua, Jesus. The next day after the birth of Jesus, Joseph made his enrollment. Meeting a man they had talked with 2 nights previously at Jericho, Joseph was taken by him to a well-to-do friend who had a room at the inn and who said he would gladly exchange quarters with the Nazareth couple. That was nice. That afternoon, they moved up to the inn where they lived for almost 3 weeks until they found lodgings in the home of a distant relative of Joseph. So they had to post up for 3 weeks. The second day after the birth of Jesus, Mary sent word to Elizabeth that her child had come and received word in return, inviting Joseph up to Jerusalem to talk over all their affairs with Zacharias. Again, Zacharias is Elizabeth's husband, and they're the parents of John the Baptist, who's already been born. The following week, Joseph went to Jerusalem to confer with Zacharias. Both Zacharias and Elizabeth had become possessed with the sincere conviction that Jesus was indeed to become the Jewish deliverer, the Messiah, and that their son John was to be his chief of aides, his right-hand man of destiny. And since Mary held these same ideas, it was not difficult to prevail upon Joseph to remain in Bethlehem, the city of David, so that Jesus might grow up to become the successor of David on the throne of all Israel. Accordingly, they remained in Bethlehem more than a year. Joseph, meantime, working at some at his carpenter's trade. So they posted up in Bethlehem for a year because Bethlehem is the city of David. And Mary, as well as Elizabeth and Zacharias, are more leaning towards the Jewish Messiah concept. And in order to be like really represent that line of David, they feel he should grow up in Bethlehem. And Joseph was pretty much outnumbered. At the noontide birth of Jesus, hold up. At the noontide birth of Jesus, the seraphim of Urantia, assembled under their directors, did sing anthems of glory over the Bethlehem manger, but these utterances of praise were not heard by human ears. Angels, seraphim, that's what seraphim are angels. And they sang anthems of glory. Of course, their human ears couldn't hear. But again, if you've been with me this far, you understand this is bigger than just what happened on this world. This is Michael, and it's a whole universe witnessing this. It's a huge deal. No shepherds nor any other mortal creatures came to pay homage to the babe of Bethlehem until the day of the arrival of certain priests from who was sent down from Jerusalem by Zacharias. These priests from Mesopotamia had been told some time before by a strange religious teacher of their country that he had a dream in which he was informed that the light of these dreams, man, is crazy. Which he was informed that the light of life was about to appear on earth as a babe and among the Jews. And thither went these 3 teachers looking for this, quote, light of life. After many weeks of futile search in Jerusalem, they were about to return to when Zacharias met them and disclosed his belief that Jesus was the object of their quest and sent them on to Bethlehem, where they found the babe and left their gifts with Mary, his earth mother. The babe was almost 3 weeks old at the time of their visit. Evidently, it was 3 wise men. These wise men saw no star to guide them to Bethlehem. The beautiful legend of the Star of Bethlehem originated in this way. Jesus was born August 21st at noon, 7 BC. On May 29 BC, there occurred an extraordinary conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces, and it is a remarkable astronomic fact that similar conjunctions occurred on September 29 and December 5 of the same year. Upon the basis of these extraordinary but wholly natural events, the well-meaning zealots of the succeeding generation constructed the appealing legend of the Star of Bethlehem and the adoring Magi. So, hey, That's let them, far as I can tell, there wasn't no star guiding them. That's what they say. They just explained what that was about. It was a legend. This part 9, the presentation in the temple. I'm gonna read just some of it really. Moses had taught the Jews that every firstborn son belonged to the Lord, and that in lieu of his sacrifice, as was the custom among the heathen nations, such a son might live provided his parents would redeem him by the payment of 5 shekels to any authorized priest. There was also a Mosaic ordinance which directed that a mother, after the passing of a certain period of time, should present herself, in parentheses, or have someone make the proper sacrifice for her, in parentheses, at the temple for purification. So they just said a mother should present herself at the temple for purification. It was customary to perform both of these ceremonies at the same time. Accordingly, Joseph and Mary went up to the temple at Jerusalem in person to present Jesus to the priests and effect his redemption, and also to make the proper sacrifice to ensure Mary's ceremonial purification from the alleged uncleanliness of childbirth. So yeah, this was one of the customs they had to do, and women had to present themselves for purification because of the uncleanliness of childbirth, according to these Jewish laws and customs back then. This is just one of many. That's just an example of a lot of the ceremonial type of things that Jews were prone to do back then and to this day. There lingered constantly about the courts of the temple 2 remarkable characters, Simeon, a singer, and Anna, a poetess. Simeon was a Judean, but Anna was a Galilean. Now, those are 2 different regions within Palestine, like 2 different cities, or maybe regions, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, they have Galileans. Galilee is a little more Gentile than Judea. This couple were frequently in each other's company, and both were intimates of the priest Zacharias, who had confided the secret of John and Jesus to them. Both Simeon and Anna longed for the coming of the Messiah, and their confidence in Zacharias led them to believe that Jesus was the expected deliverer of the Jewish people. They just go on to say that this couple basically wrote a song for Jesus and sang it, and they got the lyrics and everything. And not only that, though, Joseph and Mary were a little taken aback by it. It was kind of overwhelming to them. But these were sincere-hearted people who believed. Like, you got to understand, like, at this time, they were really clamoring for a Messiah. On the way back to Bethlehem, Joseph and Mary were silent, confused, and overawed. Mary was much disturbed by the farewell salutation of Anna, the aged poetess, and Joseph was not in harmony with this premature effort to make Jesus out to be the expected Messiah of the Jewish people. This is part 10, and this is the final part of this particular paper, and we about to wind it on down, and it's called Harad Acts. Now, as mentioned before and setting the stage, the previous episode, Harad was the king of Judea, and now we about to hear Harad Acts. But the watchers for Harad were not inactive. When they reported to him the visit of the priests of to Bethlehem, Harad summoned these Chaldeans to appear before him. He inquired diligently of these wise men about the new, quote, king of the Jews. but they gave him little satisfaction, explaining that the babe had been born of a woman who had come down to Bethlehem with her husband for the census enrollment. Harad, not being satisfied with this answer, sent them forth with a purse and directed that they should find the child so that he too might come and worship him, since they had declared that his kingdom was to be spiritual, not temporal. But when the wise men did not return, Harad grew suspicious. As he turned these things over in his mind, his informers returned and made full report of the recent occurrences in the temple, bringing him a copy of the parts of the Simeon song which had been sung at the redemption ceremonies of Jesus. But they had failed to follow Joseph and Mary, and Harad was very angry with them when they could not tell him whether the pair had taken the babe. Where did he go? He then dispatched searchers to locate Joseph and Mary. Knowing Harad pursued the Nazareth family, Zacharias and Elizabeth remained away from Bethlehem. The boy baby was secreted with Joseph's relatives. So Harad is trying to track down this baby that might be the so-called king of the Jews. Like he was born into some Anna off rip. Joseph was afraid to seek work, and their small savings were rapidly disappearing. Even at the time of the purification ceremonies at the temple, Joseph deemed himself sufficiently poor to warrant his offering for Mary 2 young pigeons, as Moses had directed for the purification of mothers among the poor. When after more than a year of searching, Harad's spies had not located Jesus, and because of the suspicion that the babe was still concealed, listen now. And because of the suspicion that the babe was still concealed in Bethlehem, he prepared an order directing that a systematic search be made of every house in Bethlehem, and that all boy babies under 2 years of age should be killed. In this manner, Harad hoped to make sure that this child who was to become, quote, king of the Jews would be destroyed, and thus perished in one day 16 boy babies in Bethlehem of Judea. But intrigue and murder, even in his own immediate family, were common occurrences at the court of Harad. That fool massacred 16 little baby boys, trying to take out early this supposed king of the Jews who wasn't even him to be the king of the Jews. It get deeper. The massacre of these infants took place about the middle of October 6 BC, when Jesus was a little over 1 year of age. But there were believers in the coming Messiah even among Harad's court attaches, and one of these, learning of the order to slaughter the Bethlehem boy babies, communicated with Zacharias, who in turn dispatched a messenger to Joseph. And the night before the massacre, Joseph and Mary departed from Bethlehem with the babe for Alexandria in Egypt. In order to avoid attracting attention, they journeyed alone to Egypt with Jesus. They went to with the babe for Alexandria in Egypt. In order to avoid attracting attention, they journeyed alone to Egypt with Jesus. They went to Alexandria on funds provided by Zacharias, and there Joseph worked at his trade while Mary and Jesus lodged with well-to-do relatives of Joseph's family. They sojourned in Alexandria 2 full years, not returning to Bethlehem until after the death of Harad. So, Jesus has been born, and already he's being sought and for his destruction by King Harad, because he has this erroneous idea that he's supposed to be the king of the Jews, and he wants to stamp that out immediately. But So Joseph and Mary flee to Egypt in Alexandria, and they stay there for 2 years. And this was all from paper 122, Birth and Infancy of Jesus. I appreciate y'all. I love y'all. And it's get greater later.